She said, "One kiss only." I whispered, "Then let's make it a long one." What happened next changed everything. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon when I found myself at my friend's house, ostensibly just to drop by and hang out. The living room smelled faintly of fresh coffee and sun-warmed wood, and the soft hum of a ceiling fan blended with the distant sound of birds outside. I didn't expect much to happen, just a lazy afternoon of chatting and gaming, until I noticed her. She was in the kitchen, effortlessly graceful even in a simple outfit, a soft cardigan over a casual dress that moved fluidly as she walked. There was something quietly magnetic about her, the way she held herself with calm confidence yet moved through the space with gentle ease. Her hair caught the light just so, a warm halo around her shoulders, and when she turned toward me, her smile was both welcoming and faintly teasing, like she knew more than she was letting on. I felt a twinge of something I couldn't quite name, admiration, curiosity, a pull I knew I shouldn't feel. Yet, the air around her made it impossible not to notice. Even small gestures felt significant, the way she reached for a mug, the subtle tilt of her head as she laughed softly at something my friend said. Every motion seemed deliberate, yet unstudied, effortless but captivating. My hand brushed against hers for a fleeting second as I handed her a dish from the counter, and I swear I felt the faint warmth linger longer than it should have. I told myself it was nothing, just a brief, accidental touch, but the way her fingers lingered, the quiet steadiness in her eyes, stirred something unfamiliar in me. I found myself stealing glances, noticing how her presence changed the room, not in a loud, obvious way, but in a subtle, magnetic shift. Even her voice had a weight I couldn't ignore, soft but rich, like a melody that lingered in the air long after it was spoken. I caught myself imagining what it would be like to simply sit near her, to feel that warmth without words, and realized I was already drawn in, helplessly. This wasn't just attraction, it was something more, a curious combination of respect, admiration, and the tentative spark of something deeper. And for reasons I couldn't explain yet, I had the sense that this quiet afternoon, this first glimpse, was the beginning of a story I couldn't stop thinking about. By the time my friend called me over for a game, I was acutely aware of every small movement she made, the way she adjusted a strand of hair behind her ear, the way her eyes flicked to mine for a moment too long. Something had shifted, though I wasn't sure what, and it left me unsettled and intrigued all at once. That single, ordinary afternoon suddenly felt charged with possibility. The afternoon stretched on, and the earlier spark of curiosity transformed into something warmer, more persistent. I found myself lingering in the kitchen, helping her wash a few dishes she had left in the sink, our movements quiet and unhurried. There was an easy rhythm between us, a subtle harmony that didn't need words. The way her fingers grazed mine as she handed me a sponge made me catch my breath, a touch so light it should have gone unnoticed, yet it seemed to linger in the space between us, suspended and full of meaning. She laughed at a joke my friend made, and the sound was richer up close, curling softly around me. I noticed the delicate lines at the corners of her eyes, the warmth in her expression, and I realized that she carried her age gracefully, not as a barrier, but as a quiet depth that drew me in. There was a natural confidence in her posture, yet in moments like these, in the soft curve of her smile, I sensed a gentle vulnerability, a hint of someone who had learned to guard her heart but wasn't closed to connection. We started talking, not in a forced, deliberate way, but in the casual rhythm of shared moments. She asked about my plans for the weekend, commented on my favorite coffee, even teased me lightly about my clumsy attempt at pouring it. I laughed more than I expected, noticing how our shoulders brushed occasionally, how she tilted her head just slightly when listening, leaning closer without any pressure. Every glance between us was loaded with unspoken curiosity, a mutual awareness of something tender hovering beneath the surface. It was in these small, quiet interactions that I began to feel a subtle shift in myself. I noticed how her presence seemed to slow the world around me, the soft hum of the ceiling fan, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the air, the warmth of the sunlight through the window, all of it wrapping around us in a cocoon of subtle intimacy. Even an accidental touch, the brushing of her hand against my arm as she reached for a dish towel, felt electric, meaningful in a way that left me both exhilarated and slightly apprehensive. I found myself longing for more of these fleeting moments, the shared smiles, the light teasing, the comfort of her near silence as we moved side by side. There was no urgency yet, no crossing of boundaries, just a quiet, simmering connection that seemed to grow stronger with each shared glance and gentle gesture. It was as if time itself had slowed, letting us linger in these tiny yet profound interactions, each one deepening an unspoken bond. By the end of the afternoon, I was acutely aware that something significant was budding, an emotional intimacy, delicate and fragile, yet undeniable. A quiet connection had taken root, one that promised tension, tenderness, and perhaps, if circumstances allowed, the slow burn of something far more extraordinary. By the time evening settled in, the air in the house seemed to carry a different weight, a quiet, almost imperceptible tension that hadn't been there earlier. The soft golden glow from the lamps and the warm flicker of candlelight in the living room made everything feel intimate, as if the world outside had faded into insignificance. My friend was distracted by a video game, leaving us alone for brief stretches, and I could feel the subtle shift every time our eyes met. She leaned casually against the counter, a glass of wine in her hand, her posture relaxed but purposeful. There was a teasing spark in her eyes, a quiet challenge that made my stomach tighten. She made a comment about boundaries, light and playful, but beneath the words, I could sense a current of meaning, an invitation, a test, an acknowledgement of the tension that had been building between us. My heart raced, aware of the unspoken, forbidden possibility lingering in the space between us. As I reached for a plate, our shoulders brushed again, closer this time, deliberate or accidental, I couldn't tell. The warmth of her skin pressed against mine, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to narrow down to the subtle electricity in that contact. I caught myself noticing the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the soft aroma of dinner, the gentle way her hair fell over her shoulder, and the curve of her smile as she watched me adjust the plate in my hands. Every glance, every movement, carried weight. When she laughed, it was low and warm, drawing me in further. I found myself leaning just slightly closer, mimicking her posture without realizing it, feeling a quiet thrill at the subtle mirroring. There was no overt gesture, no bold move, just the slow, tantalizing closeness of two people who both knew the rules, yet found themselves tempted to bend them. Internally, I wrestled with the contradiction of desire and hesitation. I admired her, respected her, and yet couldn't deny the pull toward her, the magnetic, almost forbidden attraction that grew stronger with every shared glance and accidental touch. The moments were fleeting, but each one left a lingering warmth, a subtle ache that refused to fade. As the evening wore on, I realized the tension had shifted from curiosity to expectation. We were no longer just two people sharing space, we were two people navigating a delicate, unspoken connection, each aware of the electric potential that simmered beneath polite conversation. By the time I left the kitchen, I knew with unsettling certainty that this slow burn, gentle yet charged, was far from over, and that the quiet, teasing invitation she'd extended might lead somewhere neither of us could yet fully imagine. The following evening brought a quiet stillness to the house, the kind of calm that encourages honesty. My friend had gone out to meet some other friends, leaving me alone with her, and the atmosphere felt different this time, softer, more intimate. We ended up in the backyard, sitting on the wooden porch steps, the fading sunlight painting everything in warm amber hues. The faint scent of flowers from her garden mingled with the cool evening air, wrapping us in a bubble of privacy. She spoke first, her voice unusually quiet, almost hesitant. "It's been a strange year," she admitted, glancing at her hands folded loosely in her lap. I noticed the slight tremor in her fingers, the subtle tension in her shoulders. For the first time, she wasn't the confident, poised woman I'd been quietly admiring, she was just, human. Vulnerable, real, and deeply relatable. I listened, heart quietly racing, as she spoke about her loneliness, the complexities of managing a household, and the subtle grief of dreams postponed. Each word drew me in closer, not physically but emotionally. There was no flirting, no teasing, just raw honesty. I felt a profound tenderness for her, a desire to offer comfort, to be a quiet presence she could rely on. Without thinking, I reached out, letting my hand rest over hers. Her skin was warm, the gentle pressure of her fingers against mine grounding both of us. She looked up, her eyes meeting mine, and for a moment, the world seemed to shrink to just the two of us. There was a pause, neither of us speaking, only breathing in the closeness and the quiet reassurance that came with it. I could feel her heartbeat beneath my palm, steady yet trembling slightly, a rhythm that mirrored the tension and care I felt surging inside me. I wanted to say something, anything, that would bridge the gap between admiration and something deeper, but words felt inadequate. Instead, I simply stayed there, letting our silence speak volumes. She eventually smiled, softly, almost shyly, a fragile kind of warmth that reached into the corners of my chest I hadn't realized were empty. That evening marked a turning point. The playful glances and fleeting touches of before were replaced by something more substantial, emotional intimacy, a quiet understanding that went beyond attraction. There was no rush, no urgency, only the profound awareness that we had crossed into a new territory, one built on trust, vulnerability, and the unspoken acknowledgement of the feelings simmering beneath the surface. As we sat together on the porch steps, the sky fading to twilight above us, I realized that this connection, delicate, charged, and deeply human, was no longer something I could ignore. And in that quiet, shared moment, I understood that the slow burn of what might grow between us had officially begun. A week had passed since our quiet evening on the porch, but the subtle tension between us hadn't eased, it had only deepened, simmering beneath the surface of everyday interactions. That afternoon, I found myself alone with her again, this time in the hallway near the front door. The sun was low, spilling golden light through the windows and casting long, soft shadows across the floor. Everything felt suspended, as if the house itself held its breath, waiting for what was about to happen. She leaned against the doorframe, her posture casual, yet the slightest tilt of her head suggested a deliberate awareness. "You know," she began, her voice teasing but tinged with seriousness, "I promised, just one kiss." The words hung in the air between us, light yet loaded, playful yet deliberate. My heart skipped a beat, a mixture of anticipation and hesitation coursing through me. I stepped closer, careful not to overstep the invisible boundary, and allowed a small smile to play at the corner of my lips. Then, I whispered, voice low enough that only she could hear, "Let's make it a long one." The words felt reckless and daring, yet tender, carrying the weight of all the unspoken emotions that had been building between us. She didn't move away, instead, her eyes softened, and I could see the flicker of something unguarded, vulnerable, and real. I reached out slowly, brushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear, my fingertips grazing her cheek. The warmth of her skin was immediate and grounding, and I noticed the subtle tremble in her breathing as she leaned into the gesture. Every second stretched, every movement weighted with significance, as if time itself had slowed just for us. Then, as if drawn together by the gravity of our shared tension, we leaned closer. Our lips met, gently at first, tentative and searching. But the brief contact quickly deepened into a kiss that lingered, slow and deliberate, each heartbeat echoing the desire, trust, and quiet yearning between us. I could feel her hands brush lightly against my chest, the steady warmth of her body grounding me, while I held her gently, careful yet fully present. When we finally pulled back, our foreheads rested against each other, breaths mingling, hearts pounding in tandem. There were no words needed, none could capture the intensity of the connection we had just acknowledged. I could feel her pulse, steady yet vibrant beneath my fingers, and the way her eyes searched mine spoke of trust, curiosity, and a tentative hope for what might come next. That moment changed everything. The playful teasing, the quiet touches, the slow burn glances, all had led to this first, deliberate breach of boundaries. The kiss wasn't just a spark of desire, it was a declaration of mutual understanding, a silent agreement that the emotional intimacy we had built could now take its first step into something more profound. After that first long, deliberate kiss, the world felt different, as though some invisible thread had shifted between us. The tension that had been simmering now hummed quietly, a warm current that lingered in every shared glance and touch. We didn't rush to speak immediately, words seemed unnecessary. Instead, we remained close, our foreheads resting together, breaths mingling in a quiet rhythm that felt almost sacred. She leaned into me, a subtle, almost instinctive gesture, and I could feel the steady warmth of her body against mine. Her hands rested lightly on my chest, brushing over my shirt with a tenderness that made my pulse quicken, while my own fingers lingered on the curve of her waist, careful yet filled with quiet longing. Each contact was deliberate but gentle, a tactile conversation that spoke volumes without uttering a single word. We moved slowly to sit together on the living room couch, still close, shoulders barely touching but enough to send waves of quiet electricity through both of us. She let her hand graze mine occasionally, a soft brush that made me aware of every subtle movement. There was no urgency, no need to speak, the intimacy was in the small, deliberate touches, the brush of a thumb against her knuckles, the light squeeze of her fingers when our hands met, the quiet steadiness of her heartbeat felt through the warmth of her palms. I noticed the way she would catch my gaze and hold it just a second longer than usual, eyes soft but searching, as if looking for reassurance or silently asking, "Are you here? Are you truly with me?" And I was, completely. Every flicker of a smile, every subtle nod, every slight lean toward me deepened the bond we had carefully nurtured. The room seemed warmer, quieter, cocooned in the gentle intimacy we were building together. Her laughter, soft and low, filled the spaces between us, accompanied by fleeting touches, her fingers brushing my arm as she laughed at a story I told, the light resting of her head against my shoulder as she leaned closer to hear more. Every movement, every sound, reinforced the depth of connection forming, the sense of closeness that went beyond fleeting attraction. By the time the evening waned, I realized that what we shared had transformed from a slow-building tension into a profound, unspoken understanding. The warmth of her presence, the lingering touches, and the quiet moments of closeness had created a sanctuary, a place where vulnerability, desire, and trust could coexist beautifully. And in that shared, lingering affection, I understood something essential. This connection was no longer just a spark of temptation, it had grown into a steady, glowing flame, one that promised emotional depth, care, and a slow, enduring romance. The days that followed carried a quiet sweetness, a gentle rhythm that felt both comforting and exhilarating. Our connection, once tentative and charged with subtle tension, had settled into something warm and familiar, a bond that neither of us needed to define aloud. Every glance, every touch, every shared smile felt laden with unspoken meaning, a language unique to the two of us. One morning, the golden light of early sun spilled through the kitchen window, illuminating the space in a soft, tender glow. She was preparing coffee, and I stood nearby, watching the small, ordinary movements that now seemed extraordinary. The way her hands moved over the counter, how she tilted her head slightly when concentrating, and the soft brush of her hair as she leaned to pour the coffee, these small details held a profound intimacy that made my chest tighten in the best possible way. She noticed me watching and smiled, a slow, knowing smile that made my stomach flutter. Without a word, she reached out, her fingers lightly brushing my arm as she passed me a mug. The warmth of her touch lingered, more than just a physical sensation, it was a reassurance, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond we had built. I met her gaze, and in her eyes, I saw the reflection of my own feelings, comfort, trust, and the faintest hint of playful longing. We settled at the small breakfast table, shoulders occasionally touching, sharing stories and quiet laughter. Her hand found mine across the table, fingers entwining naturally, the gesture gentle yet deliberate. I could feel the warmth of her skin, the rhythm of her pulse beneath my touch, and it grounded me in a way that made everything else fade away. Each glance, each laugh, each fleeting brush of our hands carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken words, weaving together the emotional intimacy that had grown between us. Later, as we cleaned up together, our movements synchronized in that effortless way that comes from familiarity and trust. I brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, and she leaned into the touch, a quiet sigh of contentment escaping her lips. There was no rush, no need for declarations, everything we had built over those quiet days spoke for itself. The slow burn of desire, tempered with care and respect, had matured into something enduring, a steady warmth that neither of us wanted to end. By the time the afternoon faded into evening, I understood the truth of our connection, it was more than attraction or curiosity. It was a partnership of emotional depth, a harmony of mutual care and affection. We sat together on the couch, fingers intertwined, foreheads touching lightly, feeling the quiet beat of hearts that had grown intertwined through patience, trust, and subtle intimacy. And in that warm, shared silence, I realized that the story had reached its natural conclusion, not with a dramatic flourish, but with the gentle, lasting fulfillment of a love that had grown slowly, deeply, and beautifully, just as it was always meant to. Did you feel the slow burn between them? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you won't miss the next tale of unexpected romance. Share your thoughts in the comments. Would you take a chance on a connection like theirs?